Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Post-Truth podcast, hosted by me, Jack.
And me, Jack.
So today we're going to be discussing the rise of the far right in Europe over the past 10 years or so. And to open the discussion, I'm going to hand over to Jack.
So, of course, what we're seeing in Europe right now is the huge successes of the right and the far right. Not so much, of course, in Austria. The recent defeat of the far-right candidate there might be a sign of turning tides, or perhaps it's just a blip in further successes of the right and the far-right in Europe. Now, I've got my reasons for thinking why we're getting this wave of success, but I'd like to ask you, Jack, where do you think all of this success is coming from?
I think a lot of it is what we described last week, sort of that Trump effect. So that mass discontent that's been stirred up by recent economic troubles in Europe and in America post-2008 financial crash. That was, I think, the catalyst, the crucible for these events that we're now only really seeing 8 years later, because we had this big crash, we've seen markets take a downturn, we've seen living standards falling, and it seems that to a lot of people, a lot of disaffected working class voters, I think, that the political establishment has had no solutions for this. So they've turned to parties that are promising solutions for this, however unrealistic they may be. So parties like UKIP in Britain, like Syriza, I know that's far left, but I think they manifest in different ends of the political spectrum depending on your country. So Syriza in Greece, which has actually managed to form a government, which is sort of an exception to the rule, I guess. A lot of these far-right movements and far-left movements we're seeing are, at the moment, in their early stages of building a supporter base, things like that. Syriza in Greece.
And it's, if I just can interject, you've also got the far-right in Greece as well, of course.
Golden Dawn, yeah.
We shouldn't forget.
Yeah, of course. No, Golden Dawn. In Spain, we've got the Podemos movement that really only came about, the Podemos party, that came about in 2014 after the surge of anti-capitalist feeling following the Occupy Wall Street movement in the US. I'm forgetting what exactly the movement was in Spain that Podemos succeeded. But it was of a similar vein to that sort of Occupy Wall Street, anti-capitalist, sort of socialist agenda. In the case of the far right in Europe, we've got Marine Le Pen in France, of course, with the Front National. We've got various parties in Germany, although I think in particular in Germany, we haven't necessarily seen this same tendency towards the far right or the far left. And I think that's probably, of course, because of their experience in the past with Hitler. They, I think, are culturally certainly very sensitive to extreme politics. And
yes, you're totally right there, because it's an interesting note that not only are Nazi parties banned in Germany, but also communist parties.
Yeah, exactly, because East Germany was of course treated so poorly by the Soviets, and Germany as a whole was treated so badly by Hitler. And I think there is still a lot of cultural residue left over, even, now they're 50, 70 years ago, those happenings, they are still felt by the old generation that have passed that knowledge down onto the younger generation. So I think Germany is definitely a blip in this, but we've seen referenda that have consistently, across Europe, that have returned votes that one could associate with a far right, or at least a right-wing viewpoint. So we've had Brexit in this country, a Leave vote on the 23rd of June. We've had, just in the past couple of days, the rejection of the constitutional reforms in Italy, which is going to be, I think, actually pretty seismic for the future of Italy. And I think...
Yes, well, we've already seen the Italian PM resign after
Matteo Renzi, was that his name?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, so hopefully we'll get Silvio Berlusconi
back. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's funny thinking of that, but if you were to look at Trump, then he actually has a lot of the same characteristics as Berlusconi had. So it might not be as ridiculous for, if not Berlusconi, certainly another similar candidate.
Lots of bunga time, I'm sure, that both...
With any luck.
with both candidates have enjoyed.
That might reinvigorate the European economy. So.
Yeah, well, there you go. But no, so I think Italy is quite an interesting case, and I think almost it might be as interesting, if not more interesting, than Brexit, because really the next week or so, I think, is a really pivotal time for them, because I would imagine that actually a general election is not unlikely to be called in the next week. Renzi falling from power, he was a central figure in that Italian government. And
yes, so there's two main groups that are pushing for an election.
The Five-Star...
And it does seem that they have popular support.
Five-Star movement,
and the Northern League as well.
Yeah, the Northern League. I think the Five-Star movement are, of the two, the more powerful. The more powerful, the more dominant. Yeah, and they are, of course, adopt a right-wing Eurosceptic, but I think in particular the Five-Star movement aren't actually pro-leaving the EU. They just want to drop out of the euro. Am I correct in saying that?
I'm not too sure about that, but I do certainly know that they're not, sort of Brexit sentiment. I think it's very similar to kind of Hungary and what Britain had in the EU before leaving, which was, the Eurosceptic angle in terms of I remember a Hungarian person in politics saying that the UK had a moderating effect on some of Europe's policies, etc., etc. So I think that's what we brought to the table, and I think this is what the Five-Star movement is bringing to the table too in Italy. That they're almost they want to stop the excesses of the European Union,
and the European Union probably needs that, because currently, as I think a lot of people I was personally pro-Brexit, and I think a lot of people in this country did see that. I think the Louvre campaign did a very good job in actually revealing the excesses of the European Union and how it was in cases like with the common agricultural policy and particularly the common fisheries policy in this country, how actually its effects can be quite ruinous on countries and their economy. The euro and Greece, in sort of a more modern sense, is a perfect example of this. Not allowing Greece to drop out of the Eurozone, even when that could potentially have saved the Greek economy or have brought about a less damaging austerity package than they're currently experiencing, because obviously they couldn't devalue their currency after the huge crisis. Was that last year or was that this year? But anyway, I think the Leave campaign did do a good job at highlighting the European Union and its bureaucracy, the amount of money we spent, 350 million they said, which supposedly is going into our NHS, but I don't know how
well, it's certainly available.
Yeah, exactly.
It's certainly available to be spent on things, but I personally don't think that's going, all to the NHS.
No, neither do I.
That was, but kind of on that note, I don't think that Brexit falsely advertised it as sources such as The Independent would say that they drove that bus around with 750 million. That's not 750 million, my mistake. 350 million. That's 350 more million for the NHS. That that it was never on the ballot that should you vote Brexit, £350 million a week will be going to the NHS.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think what we're really seeing is the larger sort of case of realignment and de-alignment that, of course you saw that with the Democrat Party and Republican Party in America years ago. But now we're kind of seeing that after, the Tories government from 79 to 97 and with New Labour from, 97 to 2010, it seems like we've got a much more right-wing working class than we've ever had before. So Labour will often accuse, New Labour was often accused of abandoning the working class. Well, you can't really abandon the working class if they're no longer as left-wing as your previous policies were. And, the real proof of the pudding of this is UKIP. And, of course, the huge swell of support from, even the left-wing, not for UKIP, Brexit, the whole swell of support even from left-wing working class things for something that was damned as, being right-wing, da-da-da-da-da. And playing into that, you've also got the idea of, false consciousness. So, the Marxists will say, that they've been hoodwinked by the right-wing media into thinking that this is, that Brexit's going to help them, when really it's left-wing policies which are going to advance the needs of the working class. But, that's really just to deny the agency that people have when, voting. And just looking at something like rational choice theory that actually gives people agency, then, it's quite obvious that the working class is voting for UKIP and Tories and Brexit because they are the parties that best represent their interests and will further their interests. And Brexit is really, the case in point here, that people didn't vote alongside, what they typically should have, and they voted overwhelmingly for Brexit.
That's true. And do you think there's a tendency maybe by, I guess, I wouldn't say people like us, but for political commentators to divide these issues between left and right? This is a left-wing and a right-wing issue. Because personally I feel like Brexit, and I'm probably pretty guilty of this as well, but Brexit was branded as one of those left-wing, right-wing issues. It was the right, traditional right parties on one side, and sort of... But it didn't really ever work out like that because you had Labour under Corbyn,
Labour,
which is very far
and
left.
Corbyn, at least in my opinion, I think he was pro-Brexit.
Yeah, I think
because
that's pretty undeniable.
There's no other explanation for, what his actions were.
Yeah, not getting fully involved in the campaign, not galvanising those the northern heartlands that Labour has.
And had that worked, then we may have very well seen a different result.
Yeah, I agree. And
given how close it was,
and obviously the Labour Party felt like that because there was that massive coup led by Hilary Benn after the Brexit vote that were angry at him for not. It wasn't seen he was not putting up.
He wasn't upholding Labour policies.
No, he wasn't. I totally
membership
agree.
Of the EU.
But yeah, there is a tendency, I think, to divide it between a left-wing and right-wing issue. I don't think it was that. I think generally we're entering a new political age where left-wing, right-wing tags have very little meaning, I think, anymore. Populism. Populism is usually bandied about as sort of a dirty word. But I think if mainstream political parties are going to win future elections, they are going to have to appeal to this new or this changed voter base that is now responding to populism in a way that it hasn't before. So people like Donald Trump, like you said, the false consciousness, people like Donald Trump are pro-business, pro-free market, that generally wouldn't be associated as helping poor working class voters, yet he is galvanising, as you said, those poor working class voters. So mainstream parties have to understand how he is doing that.
Yeah, it doesn't fit into your, Marxist-Leninist dogma that, these people have been hoodwinked. No, these people are voting for their interests. And even if you're working class, you don't have to have left-wing interests. And this is what I was saying, with my point a while ago, that what we're seeing now is the realignment, de-alignment. And because we've seen that so many times now, does that mean that actually people aren't going to, use the arbitrary tags of, right and left wing anymore?
I think it very well could do.
So I think the point of populism is that these people are seen as realists, populist politicians. Farage, Trump, they're telling it as it is. And although they do actually pander to their audience, they pander to, working class people, and, perhaps you could criticise them as being, xenophobic, racist, etc., etc. Although they're not overtly pandering to an audience like, candidates like Hillary Clinton did, like, Hispanics, you should vote for me, gays, you should vote for me, etc., etc. And the reason that people are getting their support, like I said previously, is because people see that they're telling the truth. And this is the whole reason why we don't have conviction politics at the moment. Because no one's telling the truth about their positions. Hillary Clinton public-private position. That's why people aren't voting on policy anymore, they're voting culturally.
Well, okay, but Jeremy Corbyn, Brexit aside, I feel like he's a politician that has stuck to his beliefs to a certain extent, right? He is unashamedly socialist. He calls himself a democratic socialist, as irreconcilable as I find those terms. But
there's nothing wrong with principle, but politics is all about pragmatism.
That's true, but if people are now voting, as you say, culturally, and are voting on what they believe people to be speaking the truth and people to be speaking their mind, Corbyn is, I think, actually a pretty good example of this. He hasn't really compromised his views, apart from on Brexit.
The policies that he espouses aren't necessarily popular, as I've said before. They may be truthful for him, but, do other people see them as the best way to the future? And like I said, if the working class is indeed more right-wing, which I personally believe they are, then you're not appealing to them anymore. Even though you tell the truth, you don't have appealing policies. You can tell the truth about Hamas being your friends as long as you like, but that's not getting you any Jewish voters, is it?
That's true. And I think that actually the real big issue that Corbyn has failed to capture is immigration, which to working class voters now seems to be that silver bullet issue, that hot button issue, that issue that if your party does not have a clear stance on immigration, you are not going to do well at your next election. And I think this Labour is tying themselves in knots over this. And you have parties like UKIP that is offering a clear vision of immigration, saying we need to massively limit our immigration. Parties like the Conservatives that are also doing very well, which, yes, their position on immigration isn't crystal clear, but certainly we can see that they are taking a more conservative approach to borders. They are saying that we are going to, as the famous Leave slogan, we're going to take back control. And then you also have the Lib Dems, who I think are going to do very well. In fact, I think they're going to be the three main parties at Westminster in the next election. The Lib Dems do well because they're saying, we want freedom of movement. Even if that is what the British people rejected at that referendum, 48% of people still want this to continue, and the Lib Dems, however much I may disagree with them, and actually this is sort of where I'd like to steer the conversation to next, the Liberal Democrats, as much as I may disagree with them on the issue of this second referendum, at least they have a clear, coherent strategy when it comes to immigration. And as such, they will do well, because they'll pick up, I think, those voters that feel that those new Labour voters that feel that Corbyn is too hard left, he's not representing them anymore, and that now Tim Farron, even if he's a bit of a prick, he is going to...
No fucking bad language on this podcast, okay, Jack?
I think we should probably disclose at this point that Jack Wright is actually a supporter of the Liberal Democrats.
Wait.
Are you not? Are you not a supporter of the Liberal Democrats?
I support the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.
Pardon. Okay, well, parties...
Led by Tim Farron and Lenin's ghost.
They've got about as much respect for democracy as the Communist Party of Russia.
I am a supporter of the Liberal Democrats, but not in every facet.
Right, okay. So what's your opinion on the Liberal Democrats then? Their current sort of policy and their prospects?
Just very quickly before I get onto that, with the question of Corbyn again, we talk about, people aren't necessarily associating themselves with right or left wing as much. Now, what Corbyn really should be doing if he is as, a Brexit and as hard left as we've been led to believe, traditional leftist 1940s left wing, why the hell isn't he anti-immigration? For him, immigration seems like a perfect issue that if he were to crack down on it, he would win back a lot of, the left-wing Brexit vote if he were to do that. And because, immigration itself, essentially, getting in other workers that will do the job for less money. And more workers for less money isn't helping the working class at all. And that's why we've got the votes for UKIP and votes for Brexit from, traditionally working class people who you'd expect to vote Labour and left wing. Now, I don't see why this isn't something that Corbyn is capitalising upon to a huge extent. Because, we've seen that he is kind of the traditional hard left that you would almost expect to be anti-immigration, yet we haven't seen that. And I think that's something that I don't personally know, of course, whether he is anti-immigration or not, but seeing the way he frames himself in every regard, I honestly can't see that not being the case. So I don't see why he hasn't broken with tradition, because he's broken with New Labour tradition quite significantly, to go out and actually have a firm stance against immigration.
Well, maybe there's this idea, and I spent a couple of days in Westminster a few weeks ago now, and I was chatting to a guy
Bourgeois scum.
And a quote came to mind. Lenin, the worse the better. In the years leading up to the 1917 October Revolution in Russia, there was this idea that the worse conditions got under Tsarism, the better it was for the communists, because the working classes, the proletariat, would become more angry, more incensed, and thus would be more encouraged to revolt. And I think more radical, yeah. I think there is this ideology, however misguided, in the current ranks leadership of the Labour Party, that their job isn't to win the next election. Their job isn't to do that. Their job is simply to stir up discontent within certain elements of society about the current political establishment, I think in particular, is going to be one of their main targets in the next election, and is to get a ball rolling of, as Corbyn termed it, 21st century socialism. Now, personally, I think that's a ruinous strategy.
I think what they're advocating, seems like the bleeding wound approach, that they want to open a gaping hole into the Tories. They might, throw themselves into the breach this time and, get torn apart, but they will deal huge damage to the Tories in the process. I think that's the kind of tactic that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's that idea of just getting the ball rolling, sowing the seeds of discontent, and then even if it takes 10, 20 years for it to happen, the I guess if you put it in sort of Soviet terms, the proletariat will rise up in a glorious revolution and take back control for the workers. But I just don't think that is gonna work. I don't think it will work.
Wait, what?
In a 21st century setting, I don't think.
Wait.
I don't think that's.
No, wait. So, wait, you're saying that the ANCAPs are wrong? That the anarcho-syndicalists are wrong?
Regrettably, yes, I am.
The socialist revolutionary... Oh my god. Can't believe this.
I just think that Corbyn's...
Evidently neo-Nazi, alt-right lies.
Exactly.
Can't believe this.
I just think that Corbyn's strategy currently is massively misguided. But then I also think the Lib Dem strategy is massively misguided, not respecting the democratic process and deliberately undermining that.
If not the democratic process, and certainly the referenda process.
What do you think about? So we just had a recent by-election for the Richmond Park seat, which in which the Liberal Democrats overturned a 22,000 majority to claim the seat with a 2,000 majority. I think it was Sarah Olney, who is the new member of Parliament for that seat, and she ran on the promise that she would, if the government, who are currently going through the High Courts to try and stop Parliament from having a say in triggering Article 50, she said she would vote against triggering Article 50. Now, I'm not personally sure what I think of this. So, the residents of Richmond Park, I think it was something like 70% for Remain. So, clearly they are Remain voters.
Yes.
Yeah? In a broad democratic sense, I feel like what she's doing is repugnant. She is deliberately defying the will of the British people. But on a constituency level, she's respecting the voters quite well.
She's given a mandate by the constituency to put in that policy, and this is the democratic system that we have.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with that, because if you look at the Brexit result, if that was to go through Parliament, and everyone voted as those constituents did, I believe that a Brexit result will be returned.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but I just think there's an interesting. It
is an interesting case, certainly, of how far do you take into account direct democracy in the whole country, but how far do you take into account local democracy and the actual electoral process?
Yeah, exactly. So
I think this is sort of what we were on about a bit last week, with the electoral college, etc., versus popular vote. You go through a democratic system, not necessarily a direct democracy, and that, I think, that works better than direct democracy. There's huge problems with direct democracy, and so that's the way that these systems operate to ensure that there's broad support. And guess what? With Brexit, that there is broad support.
Exactly. Okay, so
I don't think it necessarily matters, even if she votes against it. I don't have a problem with the Lib Dems saying that if they leave, they'll try and re-enter, the EU. I mean, I'd probably vote for that, but to be honest, I'm not really that concerned about the EU whatsoever. But, it's just because I'm, to a large extent aligned with Lib Dem policies that I'd vote for them.
So what I guess, what are your current feelings?
It's not a deal breaker for me. If they want to.
So broaden the question. What are your current feelings on the Liberal Democrats and Liberal Democrat policy? How do you think they're going to do with the next election, whenever that may be?
I think they're going to do well. I think if Corbyn doesn't get his act together, I mean, I never said that I've been a Labour voter. I've always been, Liberal Democrat for as long as I can, remember.
Well, you haven't been able to vote so far, but yeah.
They've got great success if Corbyn is going to continue to be a fucking idiot. And guess what? Corbyn's a fucking idiot. So I think Lib Dems have got huge success in store. Now, what they really need to do is ensure that they don't lie this time. Now, I've got a lot of respect for Clegg in, saying, oh, we're sorry, we made this mistake. But the fact is, you should never go back on a manifesto promise. And I respect him for apologising and saying that he did make a mistake. But I don't respect the fact that, he turned his back on a manifesto promise. And that's the problem with, that's the root of it all. That's the root of populism at the moment. Politicians are lying, and people don't want to vote for liars. They want to vote for, the realist populist candidates.
Yeah.
So if the Lib Dems, say this, they talk the talk, but can they walk the walk? If they walk the walk, they've got huge successes in store for them. Mm-hmm. But they just need to make sure that they, try and do a bit of historical revisionism on Clegg and make sure that, people don't think of that when they go to the polling office and, put an X next to Liberal Democrats. So they need to do some real, rebranding, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move on to UKIP then, I guess. So UKIP have elected their, last week, their third, or was it the week before? I think it was last week. Have elected their third leader in as many months, Paul Nuttall. So I personally think Labour have a lot to worry about here, because Paul Nuttall to me seems like a candidate that can pull in that northern working class vote. He can, I think, galvanise anti-immigrant sentiment. He could galvanise this kind of sentiment that led us to leaving the European Union. The idea of sort of a rejection of globalism, increased protectionism of our economy. I think he can harness those forces and genuinely cause some trouble for Labour in the north. Mm-hmm. And personally, as a Labour politician currently, I appreciate, UKIP have not had an easy 3 months particularly since the referendum, and since Farage announced he was standing down for the second or third time. You've had the election of Diane James, the 18-day leader who then resigned. You had the punch-up with Stephen Wolfe, who was meant to be basically the next leader. The only reason he didn't make it onto ballot the first time round is because, for some reason, he forgot to put his application in on time, because the UKIP website went down, or so the story goes. Him leaving the parties and rejoining the Conservatives. You've got what can only be described as a party that's been imploding on itself, it seems. But now, actually, we've got a leader who seems extremely charismatic, who can galvanise that working class northern vote, who actually quite likes their only Westminster MP. Farage and Carswell had an infamously poor relationship, to the point where I don't think they spoke very much, and this was largely to do with affairs in the Westminster office. I think it's something to do with the fact that each party is entitled to their own research laboratory where they can do voter analysis and things like this. Carswell said it'd be a waste of public money, but Farage insisted that they should have one. They did end up having one, but obviously Carswell was very opposed to this, so there have always been that friction there, and I think now that we've got this, he's got their only MP on side, they've got a good leader. They seem to have a reason. The party voted, I think, 60%, 70% for him. They seem to be united behind him. I think they can make great gains in the north. What do you think? Okay. Should Labour be worried about UKIP?
I'm not too sure. I don't know if the UKIP vote is loyal. Now, we saw the Tories win last election, and we saw a huge UKIP vote, 1.3 million, I believe. But there's no doubt that UKIP vote would have been bigger had the Tories not stated that they were going to hold a Brexit in-out referendum. Now, are those people that voted for the Tories that time around going to stay with the Tories? Or are they going to go back to UKIP? And, in fact, are the people who voted for UKIP last time around going to stick with UKIP or not? Now, of course, that's still very much up in the air. And so I think it really, matters whether the supporters are loyal or not, or whether they're, either going to stick with the Tories or go to the Tories. Because, one MP at the moment, that's not a big... They've got a big, popular support, but they haven't got a power block in Parliament. And if we were going to have, the 2015 result all over again, it would of course, be the exact same result. I don't know even why I said that, but the point is that, you know, a lot of UKIP-aligned voters are voting for the Tories, and if that stays that way, then UKIP aren't going to have success.
Okay, that seems like a fair analysis. I think also as well, you may see, I think UKIP, in the eyes of many of the electorate anyway, certainly the people that I've spoken to that have voted UKIP in the past, they've said that they think UKIP is now a defunct organisation, essentially. It's completed its political project. We are now an independent country, you know, we have left the European Union. They've reached their sell-by date, their party's imploding, they aren't going to vote for them at the next election. I think, therefore, that, say Theresa May calls this election in 2017, which I think if the High Court rejects this Article 50 Brexit thing that she's going to do, possibly before March, I don't know, but let's say she calls it sometime in the first half of next year, which I think is not beyond the realms of possibility at the moment. UKIP have got to turn themselves around. Like you said, is that vote loyal? Have they, you know, can they detoxify their brand essentially from the damage that's been done over the past couple of months in time for that next general election? I guess that it is now a question of time, because I think with enough time, UKIP could become a massive force in British politics.
But just as easily,
it could become a
tiny
exactly.
one.
It could reduce to nothing and slide away as.
Now, I think the interesting point here was, you know, that actually UKIP won. You know, now there's this fantastic political commentator. Can't remember his name exactly. It's something like Mr. A. Jukes. I believe he's got a MA in politics and history from Essex University. But you know, this guy's incredible. I couldn't, you know, specify anything, unfortunately. But he said that, you know, the real coup, the real win for UKIP would have been the inverse of the result of the referendum. A 52% Remain, 48 Brexit. You know, imagine how far that would galvanise the UKIP base. Tories would not be interested in having another in-out vote. Tory, you know, oh, well, we held it, you know, we got the result that we wanted, the Tory establishment, that is, not necessarily, you know, the Tory members. And, you know, that's it, that's the situation's done. Whereas UKIP would have a huge draw for their next election in which they put forward the policy of, let's have another referendum. That would win votes, hands down. So they might have even shot themselves in the foot by, you know, associating themselves so closely with Brexit. Because now, you know, that's their star symbol. It's gone for them now. You know, what are they going to do? Are they going to have the exact same point as the Tory party saying that we're going to deliver Brexit? You know, it doesn't make sense.
I think there is a real danger for UKIP actually to lose voters to the Tories in the next election, because you will just get people, like we've been saying, that believe it's a defunct institution, it's achieved its goal, and now they can go back to a mainstream political party who they feel Theresa May is insanely popular at the moment. Like, I mean, I'm not sure it's going to keep up that popularity, but she's almost irrationally popular, seeing as her government at the moment is pushing through bills that some would deem highly socially
Snoopers Charter,
the pornography laws,
etc.
that would deem highly socially even authoritarian.
Well, I wouldn't doubt about putting that label on them, to be perfectly honest.
Well, exactly, and we have an opposition that's essentially defunct. Doesn't work properly. It's having a coup every couple of months, you know. So she's almost irrationally popular, and whether or not she can keep that up is I think is a different question. But UKIP have to be so careful that they don't lose those middle-class voters, those sort of low-end middle-class voters, then back to the Tories, Tory defectors. Even like I guess Stephen Wolfe could be a case in point of this, you know? He saw the party maybe was losing its driving force, has achieved its goal. He left the party, moved back to Tories, and this was a leadership candidate. A guy who could have led, you know, the fourth, well, one could argue the fourth largest party in the country.
I thought you were about to say Reich there. Now, yes, again, I think this really does come back to the question of time. Should Theresa May make real inroads to Article 50, even if she doesn't trigger it by 2020, if she's got her finger on the button, there isn't, and she's built it, she's prepared for it, the economy's doing great, she's ameliorated the situation, and Brexit is going to be, optimal with the Tory government in charge, people are going to vote Tory. If they do Article 50 before the next election, Tories have won. Why would you vote for UKIP? What would be the point?
Yeah.
Britain has left the European Union, and you want, more independence from the EU? That's not going to happen. You are going to vote for the Tory party. So again, it's a question of time. If we're stuck in this situation that we have currently, that, will she, won't she, then I can't see any way that UKIP aren't going to, win a huge swathe of the Tory vote next election. But should Article 50 be delivered, should the conditions for Article 50 be met to, a huge, great extent, and, their campaign promise, the Tories, for 2020, is the moment we get in, the button is going to be pressed for Article 50. I can see no way of UKIP surviving as a political force.
Okay, brilliant. And I think we'll wrap up here. So, final thoughts. Personally, I think that the reason we've seen this rise of the far right and to a certain extent the far left in the West is because of the financial crash. On the issue of Brexit and any subsequent future elections, I think that the Liberal Democrats are going to do exceedingly well with their pro-EU stance, as much as they may disagree with it. Their second referendum is going to attract votes. It has to, from that new Labour liberal middle class. I think it will, and I think they'll do very well, and I think they could even overtake Labour in terms of popularity in the next election. I really do, because Jeremy Corbyn at the moment, he does not have a clear position on immigration, and this is going to he's going to shoot himself in the foot in the next election if he goes into it without a clear stance on immigration.
I don't know why new Labour members of the Labour Party are still members of Labour currently.
I think that there is going to be this mass exodus in the next few months.
How are they going to save the party? Corbyn has triumphed because of his popular backing, and that's not going to help the party win the election, but it's going to help it keep him in charge. And unless he really cocks it up, then, he's going to remain in power until 2020. And Corbyn is not a winning formula for the Labour Party.
Exactly. And finally, on UKIP, I think that we can agree that if they get their act together in time, they are potentially massive vote winners. But if they do not, then they will crumble as a force in British politics in the next election. Jack, do you have any final thoughts?
Just to kind of reiterate what I was saying earlier, we can't have conviction politics at the moment. We're having populists and all the rest of it, and we're having the left and right dimension of politics free because people aren't telling the truth. We can't have things on policy anymore. It's all about feelings now. All the immigrants, oh Christ, they're going to come take my jobs, etc., etc. Brexit result returned right there. It's, not to go too heavily into the postmodernism idea of, everything is perception, there's nothing true, etc., etc. People do vote on perception, and perception is currently that, Corbyn is a raving lefty lunatic. Perception is that UKIP is tearing itself apart, and without a good leader, they're not going to be doing anything. Perception is that the Lib Dems are the only, hope left for the moderate left wing. And the perception is that the Tories are going to deliver Article 50 and take back control. Now, who out of those groups is going to win? It's really going to be a question of demographics by the time of the next election. And I don't think that that's anything that anyone can predict.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for tuning in today. A slightly longer podcast than last week's, but we're sort of playing around with the format. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again next week for some more post-truth posturing, I guess. Thank you very much for listening, and it's a goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.